The rifle was already cold when specialist Dena Quill pulled it from the case, and she noticed that the way a person notices weather, not with alarm, just with registration, the body cataloging facts before the mind decides what to do with them. The armory at Fort Caldwell smelled the way all armories smell. Hoppy solvent, gun oil, old concrete, and something underneath all of that which is harder to name. The smell of decisions made and not undone. Quill had been in enough of them to stop noticing the smell years ago. She noticed it now because she wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this building. The paperwork putting her on administrative hold had been filed 11 days ago. Her access badge should have been flagged at the door. It hadn't been, which told her two things. Either the hold was never entered into the system, or someone had decided not to enter it. She filed both possibilities away and kept moving. 3 weeks earlier, she had been doing the thing she was best at in the world, which is to say she had been lying perfectly still on a ridgeline in a place that doesn't appear in any mission summary filed with the Joint Operations Center, and she had been watching. The target was 2,340 meters away. That number matters. At that distance, a bullet doesn't travel in a straight line so much as it falls in a long, controlled arc, and the shooter's job is less about aim than about prediction. Accounting for gravity, for wind, for the rotation of the Earth itself, which is not a poetic consideration but a mathematical one. At 2,300 meters, the Coriolis effect will push around approximately 4 inches to the right if you are shooting south in the northern hemisphere. 4 inches at that distance is the difference between a confirmed kill and a footnote in an after-action report. Quill made these calculations the way other people made grocery lists, without effort, without drama. She had been making them since she was 9 years old, lying in a field in rural Kentucky with her grandfather's .22 and a target her grandfather had made from a soup can, learning that the world could be understood if you were patient enough to measure it. What she saw through the scope that day was a man in a gray jacket walking between 2 parked vehicles in a courtyard. She had his file. She had his photograph. She had a set of coordinates and a set of authorizations that had been signed by people with enough rank that she had not, until recently, thought to question them. She took the shot. She hit the target. She was already breaking down her equipment when the radio traffic started. And what she heard on that radio was the thing that had put her in this armory 11 days later at 2 in the morning, pulling a rifle from a case that wasn't assigned to her. The man she had shot was not the man in her file. This is not something that happens in the abstract. It is something that happened to a specific person, a man with a name she had not known when she fired and learned afterward, which is its own kind of violence, to know someone's name only after you have ended them. His name was Leon Ferris. He was 44 years old. He was a structural engineer from Amman, working on a water treatment facility. He had a wife and a son who was 11, who would grow up in the particular silence that follows that kind of loss. She had been told he was someone else. She had been given documentation, imagery, a chain of authorization that looked, at every level, exactly like the real thing. It was the real thing. That was what the radio traffic had told her. The authorization was genuine. The identification was not. Someone had placed a real man inside a false file and moved him into a real targeting sequence. And the machinery of it had worked exactly as designed, because the machinery didn't know the difference, and she hadn't either. Quill lay on that ridgeline for 40 minutes after the shot, not moving, which was protocol, but also because she was working through the mathematics of what had happened, and the mathematics were telling her something she did not want to hear. The margin of error in the identification had not been a mistake. It had been too clean for a mistake. She had reported it through proper channels, which is the phrase people use when they mean they did the thing they were trained to do and trusted the institution to respond the way it was supposed to. The institution had responded by placing her on administrative hold and beginning what was described to her as a routine review. The officer who delivered this news was named Captain Harlan Webb, and he had the particular quality that some officers develop over long careers of seeming to say more than he was saying without actually saying anything. He had looked at her across a metal desk with the specific expression of a man who has already decided the shape of a conversation before it begins. The review is standard procedure, Webb had said. I understand, she had said. I'd like to review the target package. That's not something I'm able to facilitate right now. I'm the shooter on record. I have a right to review the documentation used to authorize the shot. Webb had looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not dismissive. Something more controlled than either of those things. What you have, he said, is a standard administrative hold and a review process that will run its course. I'd encourage you to let it do that. She had let it do that for 11 days. Then she had come here. The file she was looking for was not digital. That was the thing she had understood slowly. Then all at once, the way understanding sometimes works. The way a shape in fog becomes a building not gradually but suddenly, when you are close enough. Digital files could be altered. Digital files had access logs, version histories, recovery paths. Someone who needed a false identification to disappear cleanly would not put it in a digital file. They would put it in paper, in a physical folder, in a physical location, where records were kept by habit and bureaucratic inertia, and the institutional faith that paper, unlike servers, does not get hacked. The Armory Records Room was technically a separate clearance, but the door shared a lock mechanism with the Range Administration Office, and Quill had had the combination to that lock since her 3rd month at Caldwell. No one had thought to change it when her access was flagged, which was either an oversight or, again, a decision. She was beginning to understand that a lot of things she had filed under oversight were actually decisions. The physical records were organized by date, then by unit, then by operation classification. She found the section she needed in under 4 minutes, which she recognized was fast enough to mean she had been thinking about exactly where to look for, longer than she had admitted to herself. The folder was there. Gray, standard issue, the kind of folder that holds the administrative weight of thousands of ordinary decisions. She opened it. The photograph inside was Leon Ferris. His name in the folder was something else. She photographed every page with her phone, then she put the folder back exactly where she had found it, and she left the way she had come in, and she drove to a diner 20 miles off post where she sat in a corner booth and drank coffee until the sky started to go gray, and she read what she had. What she had was this: the false identification had not originated at the operational level. It had come down from above it. The target package had been constructed by a contractor working under a consulting arrangement with a man named Reeves, Colonel Thomas Reeves, who oversaw signals intelligence for the regional command. The contractor had a name that appeared twice in the folder and then stopped appearing, replaced by a reference number, which is a way of making a person into an abstraction that the document can cite without describing. But the contractor's initial appearance included an affiliation, and the affiliation was a defense consulting firm called Stonebreak Solutions. And Stonebreak Solutions, when she looked it up on her phone in that corner booth at 5 in the morning, had a board of directors that included 3 retired general officers and a former deputy secretary of defense. And their primary contract portfolio was signals intelligence support for exactly the regional command that had originated her targeting authorization. This was not a mistake. A mistake is a thing that happens when the system fails. What she was reading was a description of the system working. Leon Ferris had not been collateral damage. He had been targeted. She had been the mechanism of that targeting. And she had been chosen. She was beginning to understand. In part because she was good enough to make it clean, and in part because she was a specialist. Low enough rank that in any subsequent review, the accountability would stop at her. She was designed to be the end of the chain. She drank her coffee and watched the sky get light. The person she called was named Veda Lorne, which is not a name that appears in any government directory, because Veda Lorne was, depending on how you counted, either a semi-retired investigative journalist or a former NSA contractor turned freelance security researcher, and she kept a low profile the way people keep low profiles when they have spent a career knowing where things are hidden and have decided that surviving is a reasonable long-term goal. Quill had met Lorne 3 years earlier at a conference she had been sent to as a representative of her unit, the kind of conference where military personnel and contractors and people from agencies that don't appear on government org charts all sat in the same room and talked about things in the careful language of people who are each pretending to know less than they know. Lauren had found her afterward and said without preamble, "You're the long-distance shooter they brought from Caldwell. I have a question about wind drift at altitude, and I think you're the only person in this building who can actually answer it." They had talked for 3 hours. Quill had thought about her intermittently ever since, in the way you think about people who seem to understand the shape of the world the same way you do, but arrive there from a completely different direction. She called Lauren at 5:47 a.m. Lauren picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," Lauren said. "You knew?" "I knew. Something was moving. I've been watching Stonebreak for 8 months. You're not the first targeting event that has their signature on it, but you're the first one where the shooter is still around and paying attention. Most of the others," she paused, "the accountability didn't stop at them in the way you're imagining." Quill sat with that for a moment. "I'm going to need help," she said. "I know," said Lauren. "That's why I picked up." What followed was not a montage. It was not clean or fast or organized. It was 3 weeks of the kind of work that looks, from the outside, like nothing. Quill sitting in rental cars in parking lots. Quill walking through the public areas of office buildings. Quill on the phone in ways that sounded, if intercepted, like conversations about nothing. Lauren worked the digital side, building a documentation structure that could survive legal challenge, because the goal was not exposure in the dark. The goal was exposure in the light, in a form that couldn't be absorbed and buried by the same machinery that had generated it. They found 4 other operations. Not all of them ended the way Quill's had ended. 2 of them had been interdicted before execution, which told her that the system had worked correctly in those cases, which meant the system was capable of working correctly and had been made to fail in the others. That distinction, between a system that fails and a system that has failed, was the thing she kept returning to. She was a sniper. She understood the difference between a miss and a deliberate shot made to look like a miss. The operations shared a profile, targets in regions where Stonebreak had competing infrastructure contracts, where the removal of a specific person would shift a contract decision or neutralize an oversight function. Leon Ferris had been overseeing a water treatment project that competed directly with a Stonebreak-affiliated construction consortium. The targeting had not been about intelligence. It had been about market share. 23 people. That was the number she and Lauren eventually confirmed, across 4 years of operations, with varying degrees of directness, some primary, some secondary, some losses in the downstream chaos that a single, well-placed action could create. 23 people, and a set of authorizations signed by officers who were either participants or who had been given documentation that made the operations look legitimate, and a contractor architecture designed specifically to put enough steps between the decision and the outcome that no single person could be charged with the whole thing. It was elegant. She hated that she could see how elegant it was. The moment that broke it open was not dramatic, which is often the way with these things. It was a scheduling conflict. Colonel Reeves was scheduled to testify before a Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on a matter unrelated to any of this. A routine procurement review, the kind of testimony that gets 3 minutes on C-SPAN and 12 seconds in a newsletter. He had submitted his prepared remarks 14 days in advance, as required, and those remarks had been routed through the standard review process, and somewhere in that process a staff member named, in the documents Quill would later see, only as J. Okafor, GS-12, had noticed that the language in one section of Reeves' testimony described a signals intelligence methodology in terms that matched, almost verbatim, the operational language in a classified after-action report that Okafor had flagged for a separate review 6 months earlier. Okafor had not known what they had. They had simply done their job with the kind of attention that makes bureaucracies functional when they function. They had noticed that 2 things said the same thing in the same way, and they had written a memo. The memo had gone to a senator's chief of staff named Priya Tanner, who had been in Washington long enough to understand that memos like that are either nothing or everything, and who had the judgment to know that this one was the second kind. Tanner called Lauren. Lauren called Quill. "You need to come to Washington," Lauren said. "When?" "Yesterday would have been better." She drove rather than flew because flying creates records of a particular kind, and she was not yet ready to be findable in that way. 17 hours, 2 stops, one of which was to sleep for 4 hours in a rest area parking lot in West Virginia. Because she understood that fatigue was an operational risk the same way wind and elevation were operational risks. She arrived at an address in Alexandria, Virginia at 11 in the morning. The building was not marked. The meeting inside was attended by 8 people, including Tanner Lorne, a retired federal judge, whose name she recognized from news coverage of a civil liberties case, 2 staffers she was not introduced to, and a man identified only as Doje who said very little and wrote a great deal in a yellow legal pad. Quill sat down and put her phone on the table and said, "I want to be clear about what I'm doing here. I'm not here to protect myself. I made a shot that I was authorized to make and that I should not have made, because the authorization was fraudulent. I have to live with that. But I'm also here because this isn't about one shot. It's about a system that was designed to use people like me and then use us again when the accountability came around." The retired judge looked at her for a moment. "You said people like you," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means soldiers who are good enough to be useful and low-ranking enough to be expendable. It means the technical people, the ones who do the work and get handed the paperwork after." There was a silence. "There are 4 other operations," Quill said. "I have documentation on all of them. I have chain of custody for the physical files, and I have a second copy of the digital record in a location that is not on this continent. I want to be clear about that too. This is not leverage. This is not a threat. It's a description of the situation. Everything I have will be transferred to whoever in this room is the appropriate recipient, and after that my only job is to answer questions honestly for however long that takes." She pushed a drive across the table. "That's what I have," she said. "It's everything." The process that followed took 14 months, which is fast, for something like this. It felt much longer from the inside. Stonebreak Solutions was dissolved following a federal indictment that named 11 individuals, including 3 of the former general officers on the board of directors. Colonel Reeves reached a plea agreement that required cooperation, which meant that the documentation went deeper than Quill's files alone. He had records she hadn't known to look for, had known about operations she hadn't connected, and when those were added to the structure Lorne had built, the case became the kind of case that doesn't need to be argued so much as presented. 2 of the 11 went to trial. Both were convicted. The others cooperated in various degrees and received various outcomes, which is the way the justice system handles things when there are enough people to bargain with, and which Quill found imperfect in ways she had mostly made peace with by the time it concluded. Her own situation was reviewed by an independent board convened specifically for that purpose. The board found that she had operated within her authorization, that the authorization had been fraudulently constructed, and that the fraudulent construction was the product of deliberate criminal action by individuals outside her chain of knowledge. The finding was not an exoneration in the simple sense. She did not feel exonerated, but it was an accurate description of the facts, and she had decided, somewhere in those 14 months, that accurate descriptions of facts were what she had to work with. Leon Ferris's family was not in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. She had not expected them to be. She had written a letter to his wife in the 9th month of the process, not because it was the right time, but because there is no right time, and because waiting for the right time was a way of not doing the thing at all. She had not asked for anything in the letter. She had not asked for forgiveness, because she did not think it was something she was owed an answer on. And because asking for it would have been about her own discomfort more than about anything real. She had written what she knew, and what she had done about it, and what the outcome had been, in the plainest language she could manage, and she had sent it. She did not receive a reply. She understood that too. Veda Lorne went back to whatever Veda Lorne did when she was not dismantling contractor fraud, which appeared from the outside to involve a great deal of walking and an improbable number of books about medieval cartography. Priya Tanner moved from the Senate to a position at a watchdog organization that monitored defense procurement, which seemed to Quill like the right outcome for someone with her particular attention to detail. The man from DOJ, whose name she eventually learned was Garrett Weiss, sent her a brief message when the last verdict came in. It said the right call the whole way. She saved it. Not for sentimentality. Just because it was accurate, and accuracy had become the thing she valued most in a world where so much had been engineered to look like something else. She went back to Kentucky for a while. Not to stay. She had not lived there since she was 19, but to be somewhere that had known her before she became what she had become, which is a thing a person sometimes needs when they have been defined for too long by a single action. Her grandfather's field was smaller than she remembered, which is the way fields work when you have spent years measuring distances that dwarf them. She walked it without equipment, without calculation, just walking, which she was not naturally good at. She was better at stillness than at movement, better at measuring than at wandering. She was working on the wandering. There was a moment, near the far end of the field, where the ground rose slightly, and you could see across to the next ridge. And she stood there for a long time looking at the distance, not estimating it, not accounting for wind or elevation or Coriolis, just seeing it. It was maybe 800 meters to that far tree line. In another life, in another context, she would have been able to tell you the exact number. She didn't need to know. That was a strange thing to feel after so many years of needing to know exactly. She stayed in that field until the light started to change, and then she turned around and went back the way she had come.